Don't take offense. The financial sector are the most predictable group of alpha males you'll ever meet. They all run up the hill and jump off the cliff at the same time.
Robert Rubinstein, pioneer in impact investing and founder of TBLi Group.
I didn't have a traditional career path. It was more of a pinball machine of bouncing off this, doing that. I looked at what are the triggers to get the business community to embrace sustainability at this time, and it was finance. I looked at who had all the money, and the top 100 asset owners slash managers had direct or indirect control of about 20%. So I figured, I only have to convince 100 guys, 100 CIOs. So that led me to start the TBLi conference. ESG and impact has become this big membership card to a fitness club where everybody wants to show I have a membership, but they don't go. If you're ever riding by and you see a car accident, there's a few people gathering around, and then all of a sudden it attracts a bigger crowd and a bigger crowd. That's the financial sector. So even when they're not interested, if they see money flows going in a certain direction, they will take a look. If you're doing something that is your big purpose, it gives you energy. It doesn't cost you any energy. Entrepreneurs should not underestimate themselves. Don't take external money. Even though most of our business is raising money, I tell everybody, if you can do it without raising any money, that is the best way, because the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Simple Tech Talk. I'm your host, Johnny Palumbo, and today we're joined by Robert Rubinstein, a pioneer in impact investing and founder of TBLi Group, which has been championing sustainable finance for over 25 years. Robert has convened more than 40 major conferences across the globe on ESG and impact investing, built influential networks like TBLi Circle, and continues to mobilize capital towards truly restorative business models. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Johnny. Your name is very similar to the jockey who I placed my first bet at a horse race and won. His name was Johnny Milano. So I keep thinking of Johnny Palumbo and Johnny Milano. Thank you for doing this.
That's a great segue into your roots. I was hoping you could kick things off by telling our listeners a bit about yourself, a bit about your journey and how you got into forming TBLi.
Okay, so I didn't have a traditional career path like most who follow a professional career in finance. It was more of a pinball machine of bouncing off this, doing that, traveling. I traveled quite a bit in Europe and Asia, ended up in Amsterdam. I liked the city very much. And I worked on oil rigs in the North Sea and Iran for a couple of years. That wasn't really very fulfilling, but it was an interesting experience. And ultimately, I started the first bicycle magazine in the Netherlands, and that was a big financial and spiritual success, with the other two magazines only spiritual successes and financial disasters. But the last publication I started was the first European management magazine in '95 on sustainability. And when the investors pulled the plug while we were on holiday, I still wanted to create an economy based on well-being, and I needed to get the business community on board, and that was the purpose of this publication, to show them that they can integrate profit and principles. So I looked at what are the triggers to get the business community to embrace sustainability at this time, and it was finance, personnel, reputation. I looked at what can I influence with no money. We just went bankrupt with the magazine. And I tried teaching MBA students at a ranked MBA school about sustainable finance, but that was a waste of time. They were all worried about their student loans. Nobody followed their passion. And then I looked at finance. I looked at who had all the money. This was 1997, 96, 97. And the top 100 asset owners slash managers had direct or indirect control of about 20%, 25%. So I figured, I only have to convince 100 guys, 100 CIOs, because they were all men. It wasn't a PhD study, but it was very pragmatic. So that led me to start the TBLi conference, whose mission was change the financial system so it worked for all stakeholders by educating asset owners and managers about sustainable investment. And I think over the 25 years and 40 international summits we did, we had the equivalent of those top 100 asset owners slash managers. Maybe not all those 100, but in assets, we had a lot in the audience. And that kind of led the process of building that ecosystem before the word ESG and impact. And fortunately, don't take offense. The financial sector are the most predictable group of alpha males you'll ever meet. They all run up the hill and jump off the cliff at the same time. So behavioral change was never really a challenge. It was actually quite easy. The real challenge, and it remains today, do you have access to the actual asset owner? Because the more money someone has, the more zeros after their number, the more isolated they are. And that's always been the challenge. The convincing is easy. We would ask, do you want a financial return with a social environmental added value? And they would say, none of them would say, no, I want all my money to make life miserable for everyone. And I'm working at that 24/7. No one thinks like that. It's always been an educational issue. They just have to realize they can achieve a market rate return, whatever that is, and have influence on restoring the social environmental balance. So that's basically the story in a nutshell.
Well, Robert, I appreciate you going to the depths of that. I want to touch a bit on what you talked about around building an ecosystem for ESG
Right.
and impact investing. Robert, you've been in this space for nearly 3 decades, and over the years, you've hosted numerous international summits. I'd like to touch on
Mhm.
those a bit and just ask, how did these events help shape the ecosystem for ESG and impact investing? And what's your biggest takeaway from bringing so many stakeholders together?
I used to think that the financial sector must be brilliant because they have all of this information and access to information. But it wasn't that, because they only really needed to see three things. And the mistake that most were making in trying to get buy-in about sustainable investment or ESG is they were shouting loudly in Mandarin to someone who spoke Italian and thinking, if I shout louder, Johnny will get it. And it doesn't work like that. So we always focused on the three buttons, the three things that an asset owner or manager wants to see, which is self interest, what's in it for me, opportunity, where can I invest? And most important, this is the most important, is money flows. I don't know if you've ever seen a car accident, but if you ever riding by and you see a car accident and there's a few people gathering around and then all of a sudden it attracts a bigger crowd and a bigger crowd and a bigger crowd, that's the financial sector. So even when they're not interested, if they see money flows going in a certain direction, they will take a look. So we always focused on those three elements, not the moral imperative, because if I convince you of the moral imperative, but you're not hitting your benchmark, you will still be fired. That's the reality of the financial sector. So you have to work with that. And it's most important is try to get access to the actual beneficial owner, the actual asset owner, not the intermediary. They're just hired gun. They're just prostitutes you pay and they do what you want. But if you can convince the actual owner and show them that they can have a financial return and a social environmental added value, they can push their service provider and the intermediary to do that. Not always easy, but that's the best way. So focus on aligning with the person you're trying to convince with their understanding, and don't shout loudly in Mandarin to somebody who speaks Italian, or someone who's Italian isn't just shouting loudly in Mandarin. It's not going to work.
Well, Robert, that's an interesting insight. And just from your experience, I can tell that you're clearly a pioneer in the space of shifting mindsets in finance. Last week when we spoke, you mentioned that traditional finance professionals can be more of a hunter than a farmer. What
Yeah.
strategies have you found most effective in encouraging them to think long term and embrace more inclusive, sustainable models?
That's really always the hard part. I mean, in general, the financial sector and those who work in it, particularly if in their fund management, wealth management, they're hunters. Some are pirates, but in general, they're incentivized for short-term behavior. Did you reach your benchmark, your target? Did you beat the S&P or whatever index you're there? So they have to perform on that. And they're often not given the opportunity. It's basically three things: don't lose the money, make it grow, the type of story. But getting them to take a long-term view when the pressure on them is short-term makes it very, very, very hard, which is why it's more important to get to the asset owner, not the manager, because they get their bonus based on, performance. And I remember when we started, a lot of wealth managers hated the idea of sustainability and ESG. They were totally against it. Everybody thinks they were all embracing it. It's not true, because they felt their bonus would go down if they did this for a couple of reasons. One, they didn't understand it. They didn't know how to do that. They thought it was more expensive. But most important, they didn't have the product. So if you don't have the product of investment, and your client says, "Yeah, but Harry around the corner, they have a cool product that I'd like to invest in," that means you got to take the money out of this account and put into that account, which means your AUMs go down and your bonus goes down. And that was a real. I think that in time, the wealth managers started to see we actually have to provide a service and not just worry about those short-term things. But it's extremely hard if someone is told, whether you're a consultant, did you write your hours today? Did you write hours? Did you write hours? Did you write hours? And secondly, did you execute? Did you reach your target? And it's all very, very short term. So it's very, very hard, because that person is in a difficult position. You're asking them to do something they don't fully understand, and they're going to be penalized if they don't hit their benchmark. And even, Warren Buffett said to his wife, "When I die, don't invest with any active fund manager. Just put it in an index, because they never beat the stock market. They never beat the index." So that is very, very hard. It is very, very hard. You must focus on the asset owner if you want to get real change.
Now, I want to touch a bit on my personal experience here. And Robert, you've been in this space longer than I've been alive. So I would assume a lot of what you're talking about here comes from the early brokerage firms of the 1980s and the
Yeah,
1990s, the typical Wolf of Wall Street
right.
salesman rather than financial advisor. Now, I was working at BlackRock at the start of my professional career when we really led the initiative on ESG investing. And what ended up happening was sustainable investment became one of our core pillars of investing
Right.
our clients' money. I want to ask, how have you seen that shift over the last 10 years as registered investment advisories have shifted more towards algorithmic approaches,
Mhm.
holding money in vehicles where you make less off the fees and more off of performance? I want to ask,
Mm.
have you seen that shift in the sustainable investing space as well?
Well, it depends who you're talking to. If you're speaking to American fund managers, Larry Fink and BlackRock were, it was almost like listening. One day it's this, and the next day it's that, depending on how the winds blow. And there was a time it says we have to really look at stakeholder engagement and long-term performance, and sustainability is critical until they get pushback. That was not the case when we were speaking to European fund manager. It really depends on there. That's why you also see this craziness of Texas and Florida saying to the treasurer, "Get your money out of BlackRock, get your money out of the other fund managers that are doing any ESG or DEI approaches, thinking that will do better." So it really depends on who you're talking to. There was a big difference between the North American, or mainly the American fund managers, and the European, where the European, I think the U.S. was much more rules based, and the Europeans were more principles-based or trying to be more principle-based. So I wouldn't say that it's universal. In the end, they all want the money to grow. And there's also way too much money. There's 5 times more wealth than there is global GDP, according to the last wealth reports. Even if we take off liabilities, and there is a lot of money in real estate, but there's, $5 chasing $1. And then you wonder, why does the market do this? It's and it's very hard, to beat the index. Personally, we tend to focus more on illiquid assets rather than listed companies, because I personally don't believe that listed companies can actually retool um, the and decarbonize the industry fast enough, because they have too much money in stranded assets. And I think illiquid assets, like, I love public transport infrastructure. I love real estate, because you can show, as soon as the building is finished, you can see immediately the reduced energy use, water use, CO2 emissions. Where with a share price, it might go up, it might not go up. There's a lot of things that influence that, even if you do follow ESG. So we tend to focus more on private equity, venture, infrastructure, water, forest, climate investment, rather than listed equity. But that's a personal decision.
Okay, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into that, and particularly in the sense of your Better World Prize. For our listeners, TBLi has launched the Better World Prize to identify top ESG measurement systems around the world. I want to ask, why do you think greenwashing remains so prevalent, and what can both investors and startups do to ensure real sustainability rather than just the appearance of it, as we've seen in the last 5 years?
Well, it's important to tell people that their children are ugly, first of all, uh, when they all try to show how beautiful they are. Unfortunately, there's very little significant pushback. I used to get invited a lot during COVID, by FTSE and Reuters and all these online events, and they would sell sponsorship. You know the drill. They get the sponsor, then they would put bums on seats virtually to show that the sponsor is reaching an audience. But they ran those events like North Korean show trials, meaning you cannot see who's in the room. There's no networking allowed. And if you ask a question, it's got to go to the censor, because we don't want to embarrass the sponsor. So it's within that framework that people are, what it's become is that ESG and impact has become this big membership card to a fitness club, where everybody wants to show, I have a membership, but they don't go and they don't get on the exercise machine. But they realize it's politically correct to be part of that club, and they don't get enough pushback. And the reason why there's so much greenwashing is because it's easy to do. One of the press releases that every year around the second or third week of January, there's a mountain avalanche of press releases because of the World Economic Forum. So a few years ago, Microsoft put out this press release, which sounded incredible. Microsoft by 2050 is going to suck out all the CO2 that we ever put into the atmosphere since we've been in business. So that headline, wow, that's really cool. And then I asked, well, who is going to call them in 2050 to say, hey, you missed your target? It's a meaningless statement which sounds good. And it's very, very easy to do the greenwashing. We launched a Better World Prize, which was great. We had 44 independent ESG measurement and impact frameworks that presented their approach. However, 100% of all of the well-funded organizations in ESG measurement refused to participate. The PRI, Principal Responsible Investing, the Carbon Disclosure Project, S&P, MSCI, Sustainalytics, Bloomberg, World Benchmark Alliance, B Corp, EcoVadis raised $750 million to do analysis of supply chain. They all refused because they always refused when we invited them at the TBLi conference to join a panel to talk about what they're doing. They said, no, no, don't put me on a panel there. Put me on, somewhere else, because they don't want comparability. If you're going to go buy shoes, you want to try different ones on, see how they look. And that I knew they were going to say no because they don't want comparability, and they have a lot to lose. It's easier to say ours is the best and this is the black box, and as long as people don't call them out, the media doesn't call them out, because who sponsors the media? These financial guys, these asset managers, BlackRock, and all of them. So you have moral money. I confronted the woman for moral money, and they were saying, "Oh, ESG is not good enough. ESG is not good enough." Blah 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 blah, and they kept saying that. As any questions, so I raised a hand. How come we keep saying that ESG is not good enough, but you don't say that the present financial system is not good enough? Because look at the CDOs. Look at all the billions paid in legal fees and fines from all the people selling that crap. And her response to that's not a question. So when you confront them, they don't want, it's basically like all the people that support because they want to be part of that pig trough. They want to have access to that power center. And if you're going to say, hey, your kids are ugly, yeah, you're a troublemaker. And there's not enough pushback in a polite, well thought out manner from people who make outrageous statements, which is also one of the reasons I prefer non-listed companies as a solution to climate.
Robert, I love your analogies. They crack me up, my friend. But one last question on just the corporate world and how they see sustainability. Many organizations have sustainability on their list of to-dos as a nice to have rather than a core component of their strategy. How do you respond to businesses or investors who worry that prioritizing ESG undermines financial returns?
Yeah, because all of them don't understand what are we talking about. They think sustainability is sacrifice. We're giving up, we're paying more, and they don't see it as resilience. And as long as you see it as costing something, a sacrifice, and not resilience, if you're highly sustainable company means you spend less money on raw materials, you spend less money on waste, you spend less money on energy, you spend less money on water use, you spend less money on fines from government, you spend less money on hiring the best and the brightest to get at the level of understanding as the previous team, because they want to stay and they're very proud and they tell all their friends, hey, Johnny, you should come work here. This is really an amazing place. So they don't understand. The system is better what it used to be. When we started, the system was the O.J. Simpson method, meaning if I don't actually have a video of you murdering your wife, you're innocent. And that was checked or verified by control by ignorance, meaning they would do self-assessment. The companies would fill in their self-assessment of how they're doing, and then they would try to check if it's accurate by looking at the media. The media can find a forest fire. They can't see a can of gasoline next to a burning cigarette. And so it's gotten better, but it still remains an educational issue that the corporates have to understand. The Asians always used to think that the Europeans gave me a big hug when we started with TBLi, and I tell them the story. I was hired 22 years ago to give a talk on climate risk to the Dutch insurance industry. And I'm from Brooklyn, so I'm very pragmatic. I said, hey, you're a country below sea level. Sea levels are going to rise. I'd be concerned. Do you know what they said to me? They said, it's not a problem for us if sea level rises. We don't cover saltwater damage. So you can laugh and be very upset of the stupidity. I said, yeah, but you give mortgages. So if 200,000 homes are worthless, you have a big financial loss. Then they started to understand the self-interest about that. So it's very important in this educational issue. don't shout loud in different language. Understand where the person is coming from, and ultimately, in over time through this farming approach, you'll get through. But it is a long-term educational process that unfortunately most don't want to bother. We're stubborn, so we just keep doing it.
I love it. Robert, you crack me up. I'd like to shift a little bit towards just how TBLi is using technology to aid your efforts. We
Mhm.
talked last week about how TBLi has it as a priority to bridge gaps through technology. I know
Correct.
that TBLi Advisory uses AI-driven tools to streamline outreach and matchmaking between
Right.
investors, and entrepreneurs. How do you simply automate these tasks? And how do you see technology, AI in particular, enabling more genuine connections between these investors and entrepreneurs?
Well, I mean, we've been being a lazy person and having done these 40 international summits, and really they're quite exhausting. And then during COVID, I had to create a system of, hey, we're not going to be traveling, and how do we have connections? And so we had this massive network of 50,000 readers and 25,000 investment allocators. And every time we had our conference, people would say, hey, Robert, who should I meet? I'm doing this, can you connect me with somebody? So we were doing that informally. You can only do so many a day when you're, introducing that physically. Um, and then a friend of mine who built, he built the app for the Apple Store. And he said, you should build a dating engine. And he said, because everybody wants you to connect them with someone, maybe not for a date, but for an investment or a job or a strategic partnership or selling services. So we looked around for a dating engine that was a Canadian Ukrainian dating engine. And we spoke to the guys. We said, "This is what we want to do, and can we do that?" And we adapted it and changed and edited, and we onboarded, I don't know, about a third of our investment allocators, and every week we add more. And we coded them according to their interests: early stage, late stage, industry vertical, ticket size, et cetera. It's mainly in illiquid assets, not so much in. And then we were looking, yeah, people don't respond. Everyone is busy being busy. And it's not that they're not interested, they just don't see your message. So they have 100 unanswered emails at the end of the day, and they start the next day with another 100. And then they've got 30 unanswered WhatsApps, and maybe 15, 20 LinkedIn messages, maybe a couple of SMS, and they didn't answer the phone. So, how do you get through to that? And the fundraising became very much toilet cleaning. I'm not saying that it's toilet cleaning, it's akin to toilet cleaning. No one really enjoys it, but you have to do it every day. And how can we do that outreach automatically without us having, oh, I got to send another reminder and I got to call this and I got to send it WhatsApp? So we found an AI system, another Ukrainian, Canadian Ukrainian system that did that automatically for us, so that we would set up the sequence of various emails, various LinkedIn message, various WhatsApp, and that will happen automatically. And it increased the response dramatically and also help raise money. But the key is uh, really know the person that you're doing outreach to. And we never manage money. So no one, I never said to anyone, Johnny, you should really do ESG and impact. And by the way, give it to me to do it for you. So that already avoided the trust issue or the conflict issue, because they know I'm not looking to manage your money. And they know that we're a pain in the ass, but we're very authentic, like we have George Carlin behind us. So people knew that. And then we just said, okay, let's really research and add another element, which is not done through AI, but is there a good cultural fit? Sometimes you meet people and you say, wow, that person is brilliant, but I can never work with them. They'll drive me crazy. And so there's nothing wrong with that. So we're good at not only making that selection, doing the outreach, but is there a good fit? We really look at, is there a human? Because it never goes according to plan. It's always worse or better. If it's better, any investor is fine. You're giving them their returns, they leave you alone. If it's worse and it doesn't follow the plan, do they throw you under the bus and say, "Oh, we got to get rid of Johnny"? That's the problem. When we get rid of Johnny, everything's going to be fixed because we've all experienced that. At least I have. So you have to be careful in that. And I tell entrepreneurs often, walk away if it doesn't feel right. But they're so desperate of getting any check that even if it's a bad partner, they're willing to do that. And I tell them, don't do that. There are lots of investors. There are much more investors than there are great opportunities or great founders. So just be patient, and be selective and be a little bit more discerning and not desperate because you have what they need.
Right. Right. I sense the underlying theme through the majority of that answer was accountability.
Yeah,
We've talked a lot about Trust VC in our previous conversation. I'd like you to tell our users about Trust VC.
sure.
You've compared Trust VC to Glassdoor. It is a Glassdoor for private equity and the VC world. Can you tell us about why you believe this level of transparency is essential and how it might
Well,
impact overall culture of funding?
yeah. Well, having done a lot of fundraising over many, many years, and I kept hearing the same complaint from founders saying, yeah, we were making out on the couch virtually for 6 months, never had, and then they would ghost me. And I kept hearing this over and over and over and over again from emerging managers, and it's but I was also meeting brilliant investors who would apologize to me if I didn't respond in half an hour. So its size of assets had nothing to do with social skills. And I kept hearing about that, and I said, let's try to bring radical transparency to this that will allow emerging managers and founders to avoid wasting too much time on people that just constantly replicate this behavior of abuse of founder. It's not a problem if you say no. I'm sorry, Johnny. It's not for me. That's okay. And I've had lots of people who say that. It's you have so many fund managers who should not be fund managers who shop around looking at data rooms to suck out PowerPoint slides to see if what there is, or they have to write a report for their boss, or they invested in a competing firm. So there's a lot of time wasted, and it's hard enough raising money. And if you've got to go through lots and lots of these meetings of people who are really wasting your time and not giving you clarity, so let's give power to those emerging managers. One, to the founders that they can write a review what it was like, positive or negative. Secondly, we've created a code of conduct with a bunch of experts that we think VCs and Ps should do. And third, this will help the LPs because they're getting a big disservice because they're investing in fund managers that are not reporting back to them about all of the great companies they rejected or basically about the whole industry. And then I got like 99% positive feedback, even from people who a friend of mine, he did the IPO for Google and he worked at a big, Silicon Valley VC. Great idea, fantastic. This is what is needed because there are just so many bad actors out there. And I remember there was only one organization that tried to frighten me, intimidate me, threaten me, and they were the largest investor of bad actors in Europe, using public money also. So that's the idea: is that empower the founders and to avoid the bad actors. Hopefully, ultimately change the behavior of those, because people forget most of the people who work in VCs never ran a business. Most of
Right.
them come from a financial banking asset. They don't know what it's like to make a payroll. And often they don't always help the company. But if you read all of the mission statements, everyone is we're fixing the biggest problems of the world. I wrote an article about all of the mission statements once, and it's funny to listen to them, but if you actually see, where they're investing. So we're hoping that improve the behavior of um, of the VCs and PE firms, because there are many fantastic firms. Many. I've met many, many. And just be straight and honest and quick. And why is that? Some can respond quickly. Great, thank you. We're going to go through this. I'll let you know by that. Some can and others can't. So we hope that we can bring through this radical transparency, we can help change that behavior, but also inform the LPs that are funding this. I mean, if they don't fund these funds, they don't continue. So that's a purpose, but ultimately save the entrepreneur, the founder's time, and also help change the behavior. And maybe they'll read of reviews of other, why those guys? We're in the same business. They seem to get much better reviews, and they treat their founders better. So that was kind of the idea, and we hope to launch in this month or next month shortly. We're nearly finished with our preparation work.
Well, we'll look out for it, and I'd urge our listeners to go follow Robert on LinkedIn so you can be up to date with the launch of. Sorry, I'd urge all of our listeners to go reach out and connect with Robert on LinkedIn so you can be up to date on the launch of Trust VC and take advantage of it when it's out there. Robert, we touched a lot on the general landscape of entrepreneurs interacting with VCs. A lot of our audience here at Simple Tech Talk are founders and entrepreneurs themselves. So I'd like to ask, from your experience in matching investors with impact deals and any funding deals in general, what are the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make when seeking capital? And how do you advise them to avoid these pitfalls?
First of all, stop with the desperation. Stop looking. They all think that they think that these VCs know everything, and I desperately need them. So too many of them, just are desperate and are willing to take anything. And I remember, I don't know if you remember, during COVID, there was this massive money flows going into these online event software. And many had absurd valuations of tens of billions of dollars. Hopin had an absurd valuation, and then the one that we use, Run the World, had an absurd valuation with money from Will Smith and from Andreessen Horowitz. And I was telling the woman, listen, who founded it, at a certain time, you're going to have to start showing profit, revenue. No, no, no problem. It's all fine. It's all good. We have great backers. All right. I think it was 6 months later, said, quick, download everything from your website. We're forced to shut down because the party was over and we're moving to the next party. The same thing with, I don't know if they had it in the US, these 10-minute bicycle delivery for groceries. So you'd call them up in 10 minutes, you get a Coke brought to your door. And they all raised billions. And of course, most of them, failed. So I think, don't think that the VC, because they represent so much money and influence and power, and you keep seeing their photo next to Elon Musk or other parties, that they know everything. They're often wrong, often very wrong. So you have to choose someone who not only brings you money, but brings you support. I remember when I started the bicycle magazine in the Netherlands. I started the first bicycle magazine, which was a big financial and spiritual success. And I found an investor, but I wasn't that crazy about it. But okay, they support us. And he kept asking me, "What's the circulation of Playboy?" And I said to him, we're a hobby bicycle magazine. What does that have to do with anything? But that was the level of understanding of him in the magazine business. So I would say to entrepreneurs and founders, be more discerning, be more selective. If you really believe in what you're doing, it's not about genius, it's about grit. It's not about genius. It's about, are you able to take all those punches and keep getting up off the ground, and be, selective, as to, who you want, because as I said, it never goes according to plan. And if it doesn't, is your partner willing to grab the shovel and dig you out of the hole, or they want to pave you over and drive right over you? So that's really important. An entrepreneur should not underestimate themselves. They think, where I'm the weaker person, this, and they should watch probably those 3 TV shows that they talked about, the Uber entrepreneur. One was about WeWork, called Recrashed. One was about Uber, the founder of Uber. And one was about the woman who was a con artist with the medical device measuring blood, who went to jail. I forgot the name of her company. Looking at those and the behavior of that, if that's the direction you want to go, okay, play that game of the big VCs and, squeeze out and get what you can. But if you're looking for purpose, then you need to find people that share your passion and are willing to support you when things don't go well. So be more selective, be critical, and always ask 3 things. Do you have money? There's a lot of people pretending to be an investor and pseudo billionaire. 2, um, do you invest in this particular space? And 3, where? And then contact those companies where they invested to see, how are they as an investor or backer, before you jump into bed with them. And I know it's hard because a lot of entrepreneurs are just desperate from chasing money. Everyone reads the press releases. Oh, AI raised 10 billion and it's a valuation of 100 trillion. Those are the aberrations. Most of the people raising money take years.
Right.
And just, so don't look yourself as the underdog. You have something what someone else wants. And my biggest advice is, don't take external money. Even though most of our business is raising money, I tell everybody, if you can do it without raising any money, that is the best way, because the amount of time you have to spend to find, research, convince, get them on board, do the legal, do the detail, and then get rid of them is a lot. So if you can do it without external money, I know it's not always possible, but MailChimp did it, Spanx did it. They never took external money and they sold it for lots and lots of money. That's the best way. But it doesn't always work. I mean, if you want to start a steel mill, obviously it's not gonna
Right.
work for that. But if you can do it without, that's the best solution. That
Right, that was a
and
great
start.
lot of advice, and I'd like to keep it going with a bit of your personal story. Over the course of scaling TBLi and championing the impact investing that you have, what personal or leadership lessons stand out most? Any pivotal moments that redefined your approach and taught you what you know today?
Yeah, I think it's important to, with everything, filter out the noise. My biggest challenge was never really convincing the financial sector about this. My biggest challenge was convincing my wife that we're on the right course. She goes, "Yeah, I've been hearing this for 25 years. When is it finally going to break through?" So we all have lots and lots of difficult challenges that we have to bounce back. But if you're doing something that is your big purpose, it gives you energy. It doesn't cost you any energy. I think my greatest challenge is, I chose a sector that is extractive. The financial sector are extractive by nature, and too many in the financial sector are only extractive. Once I got out what I need out of Johnny, I'm out of here. I don't have to put anything back to Johnny. I just took out what I needed. So that, I think that was the thing that still bothers me today on an emotional level. of trying to avoid, and I have a very good spidey sense for a purely extractive person in nature. Um, so I think that that has been the biggest challenge, and getting people to who are willing to share. It might seem very, simple, but most a lot of the people in the financial sector and also in the ESG and impact space are not willing to share. They're happy to take. So that emotionally I find very disturbing, because that's not how there's plenty for everybody. There's plenty. There's 5 times more wealth than there is GDP. So there's no shortage of money. And people think if they do this, they have more. So trying to continuously filter out the noise, who is non-extractive in nature, who is actually, really willing to share in that, and I've met lots and lots of fantastic people who are constantly willing to share, or who inspired me. But I think probably the people that I'm most grateful to is my wife and my 2 sons. I'm not because they're following a particular path, but because um, they have the qualities which what my father used to say, they're a mensch, a person of honor and respect. And that's all. I never ask anybody to climb Mount Everest barefoot. Call me back. That's enough. And unfortunately, not enough people understand that. There's still this extractive nature that I only get ahead by you going down. I have to take out something out of you for me to get ahead, instead of saying, how can we help each other? What is your big purpose? How can I help you get to that big purpose? So that was probably the most important, of staying the course. It's not easy because you find lots and lots of people who are frauds. I mean, former partner who wasn't really a partner was also a huge fraud and stealing money. So we make mistakes. We try to learn from that. But it's important to have a strong moral compass. If this is important to you, if it's not important to you, okay, go ahead. Do everything you want to die rich as quickly as possible. That's If that's your mission. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that, because it's your life and it's your money. Just don't expect me to be willing to help you on that pursuit. That's not mine.
Right. Robert, that's some phenomenal life advice. I hope our listeners are taking notes. I'd like to end off with a bit of a future outlook. As we look to the next decade, where do you see the greatest opportunities and challenges for bringing sustainable finance to the mainstream? And how can technology, including AI, help accelerate that shift?
I know it's probably not going to happen, but I would love for the regulator around compliance to make it easier for retail investors to participate in illiquid investments. I know you've got crowdfunding and you've got some stuff over there, but who gets all of the deals? Why are billionaires billionaires, and why are, pension funds that have so much money? You get all the good deals. The pre-IPO deals are not. Nobody's calling me for a great pre-IPO around sustainability, because you have to be able to write a large check. So it would be great if that ability, because I know there are some issues around compliance and regulation, and not allowed to, what is an accredited investor in that. That would be great, because there's a lot of small retail investors that don't switch, that don't pull their money all out the next day the way that institutional investors. That would be really good if that was happening. And there are lots of IT systems in place that can help you find the best. But it would be great if it was not only geared toward ETFs and listed companies. Because personally, I don't really believe that they're going to restore the social environmental balance. There's just too much problems in stranded assets. So if there could be a way of allowing retail investors in a in a measured way to benefit from, and I'm not talking about a new NFT from Melania Trump that goes up 1,000%, goes down. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the lots and lots of brilliant companies in the United States, but are not always accessible. And it would be great that, people follow their heart, and that was the reason why I stopped teaching MBA students, because none of the hardly any of them ever followed their heart. They just were worried about student loans, and they didn't. They went to A.T. Kearney and McKinsey and were always complaining, or BlackRock, and then they found reason. Hey, this is not my big purpose. This is not me. This is not really what I want to do. So follow your heart. If it gives you energy, you're in the right place. If it doesn't, you're in the wrong place. But allowing retail to invest in illiquid, if someone could figure out a way around the rule, and I know it's very complicated in compliance, and I'm not an expert on that, but that would be great. A friend of mine, she used to be head of Deutsche Wealth Management, and she left because she wasn't happy with what they were doing. And then she came back, says, I'm going to start an impact fund for emerging markets, but I'm not going to target institutional investors. I'm only going to target retail investors. And she had to get regulated in 50 states. All 50 states, you had to go through that process. But she paid for it and she did it. And she did it for a few reasons, because they don't leave as quickly and they're willing to give a new product a chance. So that would be great if it's possible. And maybe somebody out there has a brilliant idea of how to make that happen. And with all the regulation being gotten rid of under Trump, maybe this will actually come to fruition.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Where
Me
can our
too.
listeners find you online?
Probably on LinkedIn, or yeah, on LinkedIn most of the time. Where unfortunately LinkedIn has a limit, has a number of connections I'm allowed to have, which is like 30,000. So I'm close to that limit. So it's possible that I might not accept, because I'm close to that limit and I have to leave the remaining one for asset owners. But you can always, reach me through there, or tbligroup.com, or come to our mixers. If you go to our website, you can find all the stuff that we're doing, and sign up for the weekly. So I might not accept everyone's invitation, mainly because of that limit. I got a message, hey, you're near the limit, so you can't take more than that. But my email is robert@tbligroup.com, and I'm pretty good at responding.
Well, fantastic. We'll be sure to include all those links in the show notes of this episode. That's all for today's episode of Simple Tech Talk. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into how sustainable finance and impact investing can truly reshape our world. Robert, thank you so much for sharing your journey and the groundbreaking work you're doing with TBLi Group. To our
And thank you
listeners,
so much for inviting me, and congratulations for doing this.
thank you. It was a pleasure. Pleasure's all mine, Robert. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, rate, and review. Stay tuned for more discussions on how cutting edge tech and innovative thinking can transform business and communities. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.